Welcome to Ken's Corner Podcast, Season 4.
Hi everyone, this is Ken from Ken's Corner, and tonight I am with former WWF, now WWE, but WWF, former WWF referee Dave Dwinell. How are we doing today, Dave?
Doing great, and I want to thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast. It's a real pleasure. And I love talking about wrestling, especially in the classic era. And I'm doing really fine for someone who's 75 years old.
That's great. Let's talk about some of the places that you have rep because you've told me a few different organizations as well as the WWE.
Well, I refereed from 1982. I started in 82 and I finished in 2015. So I had a 32-year career in the ring. Um, from 1982 through 2000 until they deregulated, I was a state referee with New York. And of course, at that time, anyone who came in, any organization who wrestled in New York had to use state officials. So I started off with the WWF and many of the independents. And then NWA came in with Pro Wrestling USA. The AWA came in. But my early career, the first 10, 15 years, was mainly spent with the WWF in places like the Garden, the Nassau Coliseum. And in those days, of course, they ran in small arenas, high schools, colleges. Can you imagine Roman Reigns appearing at your local high school today?
Wow. I think my son would have a meltdown. I have a high school son, so I think he would have a meltdown. He'd be on the phone saying, "Dad, you better get over here."
Well, that's what happened in those days. Bob Backlund, the Iron Sheik, whoever happened to be champion would appear in the local high schools. They wanted to give the fellas some work between the big shows.
That's amazing. You spoke about the Garden. You're talking about the famous MSG, the Madison Square Garden. Let's talk about some of these matches that you refereed in that arena.
Well, first of all, it was a great thrill and an honor to be um, working in the Garden. And actually, kind of an interesting anecdote. I worked the last match in the Garden using the drop-down microphone. Remember the old drop-down microphone? I don't know if you've seen it on the
I
classics.
have.
Well, I worked the last match that they used that. The following month, they started using handheld mics. But um, the first time I worked in the Garden, I actually worked 4 matches, and one of them was the sub-main event. It was the one-man gang against Brutus the Barber Beefcake. I also worked with Mike Sharp. It was in a match. My good friend S.D. Jones, the late S.D. Jones. Um, and then some of the other matches I worked in the Garden that come to mind was Rick Rude against Hacksaw Jim Duggan, where Rude threw me halfway across the ring and I disqualified him. And Bobby the Brain Heenan came in and was on his knees begging me to let the match continue. And I said, forget it, Bobby, it's not continuing. And I had a couple run-ins to help save Hulk Hogan in the Garden when he was getting double and triple teamed at the end of a match. And one of the well, I worked actually the first match of Dustin Rhodes
Well,
with the WWF, and I didn't realize it until recently. His first match was in the Garden, um, and I can't remember who he wrestled. Paul, I can't think of his name. Not Paul Roma, but he wrestled in the Garden, and I just found out recently it was the first time he worked
turned
for the
off.
WWF. And one of the really good matches was it was about a 20-minute match, and it featured Pat Tanaka against Marty Jannetty. And I don't think there was a rest hold in the match. It was fantastic. And the thrill for me in working the Garden was the fact that Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby the Brain Heenan were the commentators uh, in all my matches. And just, I thought they were two of the greatest commentators of all times when they got together, how they played off of each other, Monsoon. And I remember the Brain once said to me when the heel was getting pretty much pummeled, and the Brain said that referee has lost control. He wouldn't even make a good mall cop. That's what or and Monsoon said, I see the foot is on the rope. The ref saw it, and the Brain said it's the first thing he's seen all night. I just love the two of them, and I have most of them on tape, and
Yeah.
it was a great time. I mean, it was different than today. It was the kayfabe era. People thought it was real. So all Howard Finkel had to do was say, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," and 16,000 people erupted all at one time. I mean, I'm sure you've been to matches. I don't know how far back you've gone to matches, but
The 80s.
there was an intensity among the crowd. There was a buzz, among the crowd, and as people participating in the match, whether it's the wrestlers or myself, your energy works off of that. Your energy works off of that. So it was a wonderful time to be involved in a sport. And I'm probably talking too much here.
No, of course not. Of course not. I want to hear more. What is it like to be up and close against superstars like that?
Well, you don't want to look like a mark if you're working with these guys, you know, but there were certain matches where I got excited about and had to kind of control myself. The greatest match I ever worked. I worked probably thousands and thousands of matches. I worked with 350 named wrestlers and 45 champions over the years. I had the pleasure of refereeing Bruno Sammartino.
That's
Um, he came out of retirement, I think, to replace his son or an injured wrestler. And I refereed him against Cowboy Bob Orton, the father of Randy Orton. And I think raising his hand, and I have a picture of it, raising his hand in the middle of the ring was one of the greatest moments in my career because he was my hero growing up. I watched him as a youth. In high school, I went to matches and saw him wrestle, and to be in the ring with him was phenomenal. Another fellow that comes to mind is Harley Race. I mean, to be in the ring with Harley Race, I went in the locker room before the match, and I told him what a privilege it was to be his referee, and I think I was embarrassing him.
mm,
And he said, "Well, what kind of referee is this? I mean, he seems like a fan," and I was, because to be, it's like being with dignity, wrestling royalty,
yeah.
and to be in a ring with them. Andre the Giant was another one, you know, except I have a funny story about Andre. Um, he was I had him at the end of his career, and he was in a lot of pain. He couldn't fall down. If he ever fell down, he'd have to roll out of the ring to stand up. He couldn't, and he was in a lot of pain. So he's sitting in the locker room on a table. So normally in those days, I would go up to the wrestlers I was working with and anything I should know special in your match. Am I going to get thrown out of the ring? Am I going to get knocked down? Do you want me to not see something? So I went up to Andre and he's reading the newspaper. He's sitting there, he's got the newspaper up. And I said, Andre, I'm your referee this evening, Dave Dwinell. Anything special I should know about your match? Count to three. He went back reading the paper. And I go,
Count to
well,
three.
we won't bother this man anymore. When we referee him, we'll just count to three and let it go at that. But
That's
he,
amazing.
yeah, but like I say, he was kind of really banged up at the end of his career
Mhm.
from from the falls and being so large. It was tough, no
Definitely.
doubt.
I want to talk about, well, I'm Canadian, so I'd like to talk about this man right here, Bret Hart.
Bret Hart, when the Hart Foundation first came in, Bret and Jim Neidhart, that they were more of a tag team than individuals when they first came in. I think early to mid '80s probably. And I was assigned their match, and right away I noticed this Brett. I didn't know much about him, but what a great technical worker. Him, Bob Backlund, these were phenomenal technical people. And I noticed that how how precise and really wonderful in a ring, his ring generalship for such a young guy. And Jim Neidhart, of course, balanced him off. He was more of a rugged individual who was more of a brawler.
Yeah.
And I thought they would go quite far, even though it was early in their career and it was their first match. Um, and it was some of their first matches. I really enjoyed working with them. And then, of course, I worked with Brett later on. And I saw Brett not too long ago. And of course, he worked with so many refs over the year, but he remembered me. He probably couldn't remember my name, but he certainly remembered me. And I had great respect. Matter of fact, I worked a garden show and I asked Pat Patterson, we normally would not sit ringside when we weren't refereeing. I asked Pat Patterson if I could go out and sit ringside because Brett was wrestling Bob Backlund. And I wanted to see the match because I was very much into technical wrestling as much as the brawlers. And I sat ringside and saw a wonderful match between the two of them. Brett went over, but it was a great technical match. So I have a lot of respect for Brett.
Thank you. Have you watched any of the recent WWE wrestling? And if so, what do you think of the product that's being shown toward the millions of people these days that watch Raw and SmackDown?
I do watch it. I can't watch it for 3 hours. I find it tough because there's so much talking on a microphone and what I would call, how would you say, soap opera stuff.
Mhm.
But the matches, the guy that excites me, and he's the guy that really excites me is Gunther because he's a throwback to the wrestling that I enjoyed. I'm not saying it's bad today.
Yeah.
You can't. People say to me, compare yesterday and today. Were the wrestlers tougher yesterday? Compare yesterday to today, and you can't do that because it's a completely different type of crowd. When I started working in the '80s, they were blue collar workers smoking, drinking, and betting on the matches, and they
Uh,
thought what they were looking at was real. Today, you've got they put a lot more showmanship into it, which I think is fine because that's what people are obviously buying and want. Um, were they tougher yesterday than today? I don't think you can compare. Today they're bigger, they're quicker, they're probably more athletic, but tougher. I don't know. I've seen guys cut other guys' foreheads with their bare knuckles to make them bleed in the old days. And some of these guys like Lou Thez, and I never worked with Lou, unfortunately, but some of these guys like Lou Thez, and I worked with some other shooters like Harley and Nick Bockwinkel and Arnold Skolin, who was a very dear friend of mine, he was a shooter also. These guys were tough. Freddie Blassie, of course, thinks he was the toughest of all times, and he was a dear friend. So I could tell you a couple funny stories about Freddie.
You're welcome
And
to.
and Freddie and I became friends. We found out we lived 20 minutes from each other. And the first time I worked with Freddie was at a show out in no, no, oh, in the worst part of Brooklyn, New York. It was at a Catholic school in the worst part of Brooklyn, New York. And I got to meet Freddie in the back room and we hit it off. And Freddie was never off stage. Whether I was alone with him, whether 10 people were with him, he was always on stage. He was always the great, So we got in a ring and Freddie comes in as the Ayatollah. He was doing the Iron Sheik. So he comes in as the Ayatollah and he looks at the crowd and he says, "Holy shit, Dave, the people in the audience are tougher looking than the wrestlers." And I said, "Yeah, Freddie, I noticed that." And he goes, and he noticed a man 300 or 400 pounds sitting on two seats in the balcony. And we used to get paid according to the number of seats sold. I don't know if you knew that or not. We got paid according to the number of seats sold. So if I worked Madison Square Garden, I'd get top dollar. I'd get big bucks.
That makes
If I
sense.
worked a small show in Brooklyn with 500, 600, 800, 700 people, I might get 50 bucks or
Oh,
75 bucks. But this is back in the 80s.
yeah.
So we got paid according to the number of seats sold because you get a percentage. So the wrestlers did and we did. So Freddie looks up and sees this 300-pound guy sitting on two seats and he goes, "You better talk to Skolin in the locker room." Ani was running the locker room. "Talk to Skolin in the locker room. Make sure that guy bought 2 tickets because one more ticket might put us into the next pay category." And this, he wanted Skolin to go up and see if he had 2 tickets. And I said, "Jesus, Freddie, we'll be lucky if the balcony doesn't collapse with that guy up there." And Freddie said, "Oh shit, what a week here. Go home early."
Yeah.
So he was a very funny guy. And like I say, I would get his goat sometime. I'd go, "Hey Freddie, I heard Gorgeous George was a really tough wrestler," because Freddie thought he was the only toughest wrestler of all. "I heard Gorgeous George, very tough wrestler." He goes, "God damn, he didn't know the difference between a toenail and a toe hold." So he was a he was a character. He came. I was the receiver of taxes. I always had a real job. I never I did this weekends, nights, summers. I traveled with the Indies in the weekends and stuff. But Freddie, I was the tax receiver for one of the largest towns in New York State, and I collected his taxes, Arnold Scolin's taxes, and Paul Heyman's parents' taxes.
Wow.
So Freddie comes in the office one day, and I'm sitting in my office, and my staff sees this man at the counter with a gold cane banging on the counter, saying, "Where's the mayor's office? Where's the mayor's office? Where's the mayor's office? I'm going to go body slam him on his desk." And so they come running into me and say, "Dave, there's a wild man in the office." And I said, "That's not a wild man. That's Freddie. I know." "You know him?" I said, "I work with him." "What?" I said, "Tell Freddie to come in." So Freddie comes into my office and I said, "Freddie, what's going on? You're going to body slam the mayor? Why?" "I got wild cats running on my lawn and nobody, he didn't do anything about it. I called his office." I said, "Freddie, if you go body slam him on your desk, I'm going to have to call the cops." He goes, "Shit, you're going to call the ambulance." So
That's
Freddie was
great.
Freddie, you know.
That's you know what, my dad's gonna love listening to your stories. That's right around his era. That's how I was introduced to WWE and WWF wrestling. It's amazing stories. Thank you so much. What I want to know before we sign off here today, Dave, I want to talk about your last match. What your feeling was, who you were refereeing in that last match. Did you know that you were quitting after that, that your career was over? And how was it?
My career was cut short. I was doing, well, cut short 32 years. I guess it wasn't cut short. I was refereeing Samoa Joe and uh, Kurt Angle. And Roddy Piper was in the ring. It was an independent show. And Roddy Piper was in the ring, and I was outside the ring, and he called me into the ring. "Ref, ring the bell. Get in here." Well, when I rolled into the ring, I caught my wrestling boot on the apron, and I tore a meniscus in my knee. And I'd already had arthritis in there. Well, I made it through the match because it was being taped, and I made it through the match. The next 2 matches, my knee kept caving in, and I had never been injured. I had been cut in the match. People threw stuff. I hit it with ice one night, a chunk of ice, but I had never seriously been injured. I had bruised ribs, but I just couldn't continue, and I knew that. And I tried, and I finally told my wife, I said, "I'm going to try one more time." She said, "Well, I'm not going to drive you home, and I'm not going to look at your knee blow up." She goes, "If you can get off the floor without holding on to something, then I'll go." And I couldn't do it. And then I decided it was time to retire. And I wanted to do one last match. And the promoter, Mike Lombardi from Northeast Wrestling, said to me, "You want to do one more match?" I said, "You know what? I'll do a battle royal. I don't think I can. I don't want to get down. I don't want to. I don't know if you time wise we're out of time or something, but I did a battle royal. I raised a guy's hand, and I have to say there was a little tear in my eye leaving. My grandchildren were there. My grandchildren attended, and as I left the arena for the last time, said goodbye to everybody. There was a little tear in my eye because, I've been involved for 32 years, and I knew it was time because the wrestlers, the other refs were going, "Oh, I wasn't even born when you started refing," or "I've seen you on the oldies shows," and I'm going, "It's time."
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been an amazing ride to listening to what all your stories. I really appreciate you reaching out and coming on our podcast up here in Canada. Our watchers are just going to love this. I know I did. I appreciate it so much. You have a great night, sir. I'm here. My name's
Thank
Ken
you.
from Ken's Corner, and I'm here with former WWF referee Dave Dwinell. I'm sorry, did I say it right?
Well, anything is fine.
You know what? I'm the worst with names, Dave. I'll just call you Ref Dave.
It's an unusual last name, and people would say, "What's your real name?" I said, "If I was going to take a ring name, would I take Dave Dwinell?" Come on.
That's true. That's true. Unless you're actually a wrestler, then it'd be Dave wins all. You have a great night. By the way,
Thank you for inviting me.
you're welcome. And go Leafs go. Let's not forget that. just a little joke. My new Boston Bruin friend here. You have a great day, Dave. Bye-bye.
Take care.